Coming up on This Week in Enterprise Tech, is Microsoft a sleeping tiger or a deranged house cat? We continue our deep dive into DDoS, and the smart grid makes an appearance. Twyat on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for This Week in Enterprise Tech is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Twyat. This Week in Enterprise Tech, Episode 39, recorded April 29th, 2013. Smart grids and dumb interfaces. This episode of Twyat is brought to you by Rackspace, the open cloud company. At Rackspace, build what you want, where you want, and how you want it. All backed by their world-renowned fanatical support. Try it today. Download the open cloud at rackspace.com/open. And by TechServe. TechServe assists U.S. businesses of all sizes with their technology needs, including Apple, Avid, Adobe, and HP solutions. Visit techserve.com/Twyat and receive a complimentary iPad deployment assessment. And by RingCentral. We do everything in the cloud. That's why I love my cloud-based phone system by RingCentral. Zero startup cost, and RingCentral is $20 per month per user. Try it now with a 30-day risk-free trial and buy one desk phone and get a second phone free, up to 20 phones. Call 800-543-9980 or visit ringcentral.com and use our promo code TWIT. Welcome to Twyat, This Week in Enterprise Tech. It's the show dedicated to the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and the geek who just wants to know how the world is connected. I'm your host, Father Robert Balacer, the digital Jesuit, your guide to all things in the enterprise, and I'm joined, as always, by an absolutely star-packed, stellar cast of panelists, starting with Mr. Brian Chi, who, Brian, where are you coming to us today?
I am on my home's back patio, and right above my head is a 7.2 kilowatt photovoltaic array. I am a green geek.
He's a green geek, and that's not just for show. It's actually part of the episode. Also joining us is Mr. Curtis Franklin from Enterprise Efficiency. Curtis, you're still in Florida. You're kind of 8-bit today, so something's happening to your bandwidth. But other than that, how are you doing?
Well, take me out of 8-bit and I'm fine. I suspect it's some of the rain that we're getting a little bit further up the peninsula, but doing well, getting ready to head out to Interop next week and the week after that to Sapphire Now in Orlando. So enjoying some time in the office before I head out on the road for a couple of weeks.
As we all know, those bits hate water. You know who doesn't hate water? Miss Mary Jo Foley. That's right. Our very own queen of all things Microsoft has joined us for a super special episode of Microsoft-related themes. Mary Jo, thank you very much for coming back. It's been, what, 10, 20 episodes since you've been here?
Too long. Way too long.
Way too long. Now, before we start, what are you doing? What are you working on? What kind of rumors are you going to be releasing in the near future? Can you give us a hint?
I'll give you a little hint. They'll involve colors.
Oh, okay. That's kind of cryptic. I like that. I like chat room will decipher it, and we'll get right back to it. But let's get into the news. We're not doing any Enterprise Bites today because we're doing Mary Jo's magical Microsoft Menagerie. Yes, that's right. Say that 3 times fast. The first item is coming soon to a Windows 8 PC near you, the Start button. Mary Jo, you broke this. You got the scoop. Tell us what's going on.
Okay. So we got some tips a couple weeks ago that Microsoft might be thinking about bringing back the Start button and also enabling boot straight to desktop with Windows Blue, which is Windows 8.1. And since then, there's been a lot of corroborating evidence. So I'm going to say I'm becoming more and more certain that that the Start button, not the Start menu, just the Start button that'll take you to the existing Metro-style Start screen, is very likely to be part of the version of Windows coming out later this year. And I think it'll be an option. I don't think it'll be required, but it's definitely something that's meant to appeal to enterprise users, especially ones who, when they show Windows 8 to their customers, they have no kind of anchor or no familiarity point, and they really want to have it not be so frightening to them, and also not to have to pay for retraining. So I think that's what the inspiration is here for this.
Yes. Now, you reported in several of your blogs that we had the outgoing CFO at Microsoft say in an April 18th analyst call that Windows Blue further advances the vision of Windows 8 as well as responding to customer feedback. That's interesting because the whole thing about Windows 8 has been Microsoft saying, we're not responding to customer feedback. This is the new face of Windows. This is what we're going to do. This is what you need to learn. So is this backpedaling?
I don't care if they call it backpedaling or whatever anybody wants to call it. I think it's really being responsive to customers and something they should have done before now. I think the belief inside may have been something along the lines of, when we had Office and we introduced the ribbon, people kind of hated it at the beginning, and a lot of people still hate it now. But we're just going to keep it there, and they're going to get used to it. I think on Windows that logic doesn't apply as well. And I think they've realized that now, just a year into trying to sell it to enterprises. And I think they're having some major kind of rethinking about what the best approach is to get people to adopt the new version of Windows.
Right, right. Curtis, I want to throw over to you. We have seen this problem for the entire release of Windows 8, which is the kernel is actually pretty good. It's a stable version of Windows. It is a little bit faster on many processes, but enterprise just wasn't going to do it. With Windows 7 being as good as it is, with Windows 7 being as stable as it is, there was no need for the enterprise to upgrade to Windows 8, especially if it was going to change things around and require people to retrain. If they're starting to add these familiar elements from 7 into 8, does that change the game for enterprise at all, or is it still a no-go?
I think it changes the direction a little bit. It's what many enterprise people will consider a step in the right direction. Whether it by itself will be enough to really move the needle significantly remains to be seen. I think what Microsoft is trying to do here is find that magic point of the desktop experience and the tablet experience. Now, with Windows 8 in the first release, they really swung way over to the tablet side on their user experience. And what they found is that a lot of traditional desktop users, especially in the enterprise, found that a step that was just too big to take. So now they're trying, I wouldn't say to walk back, but to find that happy middle point where you have all of the new things that people need with all of the old stuff that lets them remain comfortable. Will this be it? I'm not sure. But like I said, I think a lot of people are going to consider this a step in the right direction.
All right. Cheebert, let me toss over to you here. You've been playing with Windows 8 quite a bit, and you've played with the Metro interface. You've played with the new desktop interface. Do you think that this is enough? Just simply adding the start button to Windows 8, does that entice enough people into thinking, well, it's close enough to Windows 7 that I can now use them interchangeably?
No, not quite. I go back to 2 years when the Reviewers Workshop happened and we started learning about Windows 8 for the first time. And we all got very excited because they were promising us the ability that when we did the install, that we could choose desktop only, or we could choose desktop with Metro, or we could choose command line only, meaning kernel only, which was very, very exciting, especially for the OEMs, especially for the people that wanted to put their own GUIs on there for custom kiosks, custom instruments. Could you imagine a kernel as stable as Windows 8 finally being able to stabilize some medical equipment or gas pumps or kiosks? There's how many kiosks have you gone to that have had the blue screen of death on it? And that's because a lot of them are still running Windows XP embedded.
That's right. That's right. Mary Jo, let me go back to you. This has been a common complaint among Windows 8 enterprise users, which is, why are you turning my desktop, which is wonderfully productive and does all the things that we need it to do, into a tablet? I want my laptop to be a laptop. I want my desktop to be a desktop. Why are you making me boot into Metro? Might there be any news on that front?
Yeah, there's hints that Microsoft may also add an option for people to boot straight to the desktop which was something a lot of people were really surprised they didn't do with Windows 8 when it came out last year. But that is also on the table, and that may be one of those cryptic references we heard the CFO make to we're doing what customers want us to do now. So I think I wouldn't be too surprised to see that come back.
Right.
Can I read you a little note I got today in email that's really
please.
interesting? Okay. So a lot of people, when I've been talking about this on Windows Weekly, talking about the start button coming back, they've said, oh, that doesn't make any sense. Nobody really wants that. That's not going to appease IT. Here's a note I got from an IT manager whose name will remain anonymous. I was just listening to your podcast. I completely agree with your statement about Microsoft Business customers. Our 250 Microsoft Enterprise account desktops will stay on Windows 7 until they do these things. You are correct. All of the enterprise sysadmins I know are saying the same. This is like, it's not enough, I agree, but it's definitely a step in the direction of showing that they realize that Windows 8, as it is now, doesn't make as much sense on a touch laptop, and they need to make it more palatable to business customers.
Yeah, I like that. Now, that actually gives me the option to bring in another blog post that you had talking about the future of Metro. And this brings up specifically what you just expressed in that viewer's email, which is it enough to bring back the start button, or do we need to start rolling back Metro? Is Metro the problem here? Most people are saying that the Windows 8 kernel is better. It is a better operating system than 7. It just has a horrible, horrible UI layer on top of it. So, Mary Jo, let me ask you, following up on your blog post, is Metro dying?
No. And this is really important to say and make clear to people. Some people are taking these comments about the start button and the boot to desktop coming back as saying Microsoft's going to dump Metro. Nothing could be further from the truth on that. In fact, they're going totally full steam ahead with Metro, and I think at Build, which is coming up at the end of June, we're going to hear a lot more about how Microsoft is tweaking its developer tooling to make it so that developers who want to build an app that has the Metro-style tiled interface can get that to work all across different platforms. So Windows Phone, Windows 8, and maybe even Xbox. I'm not sure about that last part, but they're not moving away from Metro. They're going towards it. And this is just kind of a bone they're throwing to enterprise IT, but not in any way that they're stepping back from Metro.
Okay, I like that. That's nice, and it's decisive. Curtis, let me throw that to you. Is that a tenable strategy to say, okay, we're still invested in Metro. We want Metro because we can keep the same interface across our entire range of screens, our laptops, our desktops, our tablets, our phones, our entertainment consoles, but we're going to throw a bone to you at the enterprise because we know you want something that will not require extensive retraining. Will it end there, or do you see consumers saying, wait a minute, why is enterprise able to boot in the desktop and we can't?
Well, I don't think that consumers, are going to speak with any sort of unified voice. Consumers tend to speak with a voice when it comes to hardware sales. Now, there's an extent to which they're doing that, in that we've seen the sales of new systems drop off. But the fact is that the only ones who make decisions in quantities that matter based solely on the operating system are the enterprises. So it makes sense to help out your OEM partners with something that they can offer to the enterprise customer. Face it, if someone's going to buy 10,000 units of something, you want to make it as easy for them as possible. And that keeps them moving gradually in the direction you want everyone to go. You see, I think that Microsoft is absolutely convinced that they're right, that a single user interface, one that looks an awful lot like what we're calling the Metro interface, is the way to go. They just are beginning to realize that they may have to help people make the steps to get there a little bit more. The consumer side, they don't have the massive retraining costs. They don't have the sort of resistance that the enterprise has. So I don't think we're going to see those two brought together. One side will get a lot of consideration on the interface side. The other side, hey, It's pricing and hardware, and that's the way the consumers like it.
I like it. Cheebert, I want to give you the last word on this particular part of the segment. We've got Burke in the chat room who said, oh, great, Microsoft gave us a pity patch. Do you see this as a pity patch? And let me follow it up with a question from Big Ginge, who says, why do we need both a Metro and a desktop app installed? Why not make one universal app like iPhone or iPad? Considering everything that Curtis and Mary Jo have said about Microsoft's vision for the future, is this a pity patch, and is it enough?
I don't know. I think it's maybe, yeah, okay, fine. Let's call a spade a spade. Yeah, it's a pity patch. Realistically, if I was in the executive suite, I would give a pity patch, but then finally bring back the ability for third-party GUIs, because that's really what's going to happen. Is Windows 8 has the potential for exploding, just like Android has. And the reason why Android's really exploding is this whole, I can put my GUI on it and get what I really want and need. So 2 years ago, we were at the reviewers workshop. Everybody got excited. That's the ability to have third-party GUIs, the ability to customize things, the ability to have a kernel, just like Server 2012 Core or Server 2008 Core. That's a really, really exciting thing, because now all of a sudden we can strip our machines down and we can do exciting, exciting things with the user interface without the rest of the baggage dragged along.
Yeah. Now, Mary Jo, you're going to keep us apprised of any developments here, but you're going to be the first one to break it, right?
I'm going to do my best.
That's fantastic. Let's move on to the next bit of Microsoft news, and that is all about Office 365 and Azure. We've heard rumblings, again, from our very own Mary Jo Foley, about how Office 365 could be hosted on top of Azure. Now, both teams have been spotted speaking about this. So you've got the Azure team, you've got the Office 365 team getting together and discussing the logistics. How would this work? Why would we do this? How could it be better? Mary Jo, could you give us the nutshell view of why we'd want to see 365 on top of Azure?
Well, I can think of a couple of reasons. One is it would be an incredible endorsement for the stability of Azure if Microsoft did this. It would be like, okay, we're putting one of our biggest businesses, it's almost $1 billion run rate now per year, Office 365. We're putting it on top of Azure. So that tells you they believe the platform is rock solid and solid enough to bet the business on. Because when Office 365 goes down, Microsoft has to pay customers for the downtime. So this would say, all right, we're ready. We think this is really ready. The other reason is when Microsoft puts these different cloud-hosted services on top of a common platform, the thinking is that it will make them look and feel more similar, and it will allow people to administer them in a more similar way and a more sensible way. But it also will let Microsoft update them much more quickly. So right now, we're getting Office 365 updates out to customers about every quarter. That's what we're seeing. But they're talking now, even without putting it on Azure, even before that point, that they think they can go as quickly as every month, if not faster, in terms of getting new Office 365 features out to customers who are purchasing the subscriptions. And if they did actually put this on top of Azure, I think they could really make that happen, because then you create a feature that updates on all three services, on Lync, on Exchange, and on SharePoint. And you don't have to worry about, oh, we have to do it this way on SharePoint and this way on Exchange. So that's kind of like the highest level thinking inside right now about this. They want to be able to take advantage of the synergies across the platform. And also, I would think, although they haven't said this, make it a big proof point for Azure being very stable.
Right. Cheebert, let me throw this over to you. Something that Mary Jo said just strikes me as wonderful, and that is the ability to roll out updates to Office far more quickly. We're sort of in the holding pattern. We know we might get a new Office every couple of years. Features might be rolled out in 2-3 years, but we don't see immediate upgrades other than patches to Office, because that's just not what we expect from Microsoft. If it actually was on top of Azure, we could see more patches more quickly. Do you think that would be tantalizing to enterprise?
Oh, I think so. Just remember, the cloud train is definitely gaining a lot of steam. Just about everybody I know is either talking or doing clouds. OpenStack is gaining a lot of momentum. What Microsoft wants Azure to succeed. They want more people to adopt Azure. They just need to find that killer app. And maybe this might be it. Who knows?
Curtis, that's actually, I want to throw that to you. That's a good point, which is Microsoft may be a little worried for Azure with OpenStack getting more and more popular, with more adopting that open framework. Is this a way for them to head that off? Could Microsoft say, hey, yeah, OpenStack's fine, but of course Azure has Office 365?
I think that offering Office 365 is one good thing. Another thing is that it shows that Azure can handle something the size of Office 365. One of the questions that always exists about any part of the cloud is just how robust, just how available, just how reliable is this service that you're asking me to bet some of my business on? If they can show that they have bet part of their business on Azure, then it becomes a somewhat more compelling sale to the enterprise. I think that may be at least as much a part of this as the actual update and refresh cycle. From what I've seen, we're having the discussion about how big a change Windows 8 has been and whether or not that has slowed down its acceptance in the enterprise. The same is true to a certain extent with Office. Small updates for security reasons, those are welcomed on a regular schedule, although the enterprise needs to sandbox them, make sure they're stable. The big changes, if everyone remembers the introduction of the ribbon, that counts. A big change to Office has similar retraining and loss of productivity concerns as a change to the operating system. So when you say, will the enterprise really be excited about much more frequent refreshes to Office? It depends on what we're talking about. Keeping maintenance up, yeah, they're going to like that. If they see this as an opportunity for Microsoft to make wholesale changes to Office on a more regular basis and enforce those changes through a subscription model, then they're going to get a lot less excited in a real big hurry.
Mary Jo, I'm seeing a little bit of confusion in the chat room. Maybe we should back up and give something a little bit more elementary. People are wondering, okay, what exactly is Azure? How does it compare to OpenStack? And what is Office 365? I think they might be confused thinking Office 365 is already in the cloud. Azure is another cloud product. What's the differentiation and why is it a big deal that they're thinking about putting 365 on top of Azure?
Yep. So Azure is Microsoft's public cloud. It's basically the equivalent to AWS, if you know Amazon. And it also, though, it's not just the infrastructure as a service part, which is actually the more recent part of Azure that they've just rolled out, but it started out as what's called a platform as a service. So it's Microsoft's play also for developers who want to re-architect apps, start from scratch, and build a truly cloud-enabled, cloud-ready app. So it's like the base level infrastructure platform. If you think about Windows and Windows Azure, the way Microsoft thinks about it is Windows Server is on-premises, Windows Azure is the cloud complement to it. So Office 365 is very parallel to that. But it's like the next level up in the stack. So just as you have now Exchange and SharePoint and Lync that run on premises, the cloud complement that Microsoft's built to those things are Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, and Lync Online. And those three things together are the base of what is called Office 365. So right now, Microsoft has both of these cloud plays in their own data centers. They operate them, they host them. But they don't have what they don't have right now is Office 365 on top of Azure. A lot of people think that's how Office 365 is hosted right now, but it's not. And so I don't know how long a range a goal this is, but the ultimate goal is to take those three cloud servers and host them on top of Azure. So that's what we're talking about here as being the distinction.
Right. I want to move on to the next topic, which again is related, and it's it's a doozy. So a while back, Microsoft acquired Yammer for a ton of money, and at the time, people weren't really sure what Microsoft was going to do with it. Yammer is a social networking platform, but for enterprise. It's guided for enterprise. It's a way of getting your enterprise employees to be social, but not with other platforms that can risk security and productivity losses. So people wondered why they would use Yammer. A little bit of a blog article, again, here from Mary Jo Foley, shows us that Yammer could actually be used to improve the infrastructure as a service releases from Microsoft. Mary Jo, why would Yammer, why would the ability to give immediate feedback be necessary in something like Office 365 on top of Azure? When we have releases that are judged in days and weeks instead of months and years, what does that immediate feedback give us?
Yeah, this to me was really interesting because I've been trying to talk to Microsoft about this for months, literally. And finally, they let me talk to some people on the Office 365, the Yammer, and the Azure teams. And Microsoft keeps saying we want to get more agile, right? They want to come out with these releases of these enterprise products more quickly. But if you think about it, in the past, it's taken Microsoft 3 years to do a new release of Office, right? Every 3 years, pretty much like clockwork, you get a new version of Office. So now they're saying we're going to have this happen yearly. So my question was, how did you go from A to B? Like, what's making this possible? You have 5,000 Office developers. How did you just suddenly one day say to them, hey, now instead of doing this every 3 years, we're going to do it every year? And it was very surprising to me that Yammer is playing a pretty substantial role in this whole transition in the way Microsoft is doing software. Microsoft bought Yammer for $1.2 billion last year. And a lot of people were kind of scratching their heads saying, wow, SharePoint can do a lot of what Yammer does. Why did they just do this? Well, I'm not going to go so far as to say they bought Yammer to help them rethink the development and delivery model, but that's kind of what ended up happening. Yammer comes in and they said, hey, we think you guys need to get a lot more agile. Like, instead of talking about delivering every quarter, you need to deliver every month or maybe every week or every few days even. And this was, I mean, Microsoft was already thinking along these lines too. It wasn't like Yammer told them they should do this and they did it. But I think they needed to see a company that was building an enterprise app that was actually able to pull this off. And Yammer does a lot of different techniques around continuous development. They do a lot of things around coming out with very small incremental releases so that the surface area of the releases is less something that's some giant big bang thing that you have to patch and really flip out about because you're changing like thousands of features at once. And the Yammer people are showing them like, hey, you could do these little drops. You could start out by just pushing them out to people on a trial basis, get the feedback right away, gather information and data, and watch how they implement the features, watch what works, watch what doesn't work, and then take those learnings and do much quicker iterations. And I think that this impact from Yammer, as the co-founder of Yammer said to me, he said, this might be our bigger legacy at Microsoft than the actual technology they bought. It might be how we change their minds and help them change their minds about building things more quickly, especially for the cloud. So I found that super interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me throw that over to Chibert. Chibert, we see with Office 365 on top of Azure, the ability to release updates more quickly. We see with the integration of Yammer into their SharePoint offerings, let's be honest here, they have the ability to get the feedback more quickly from the developers so that they can do these releases in a way that doesn't tick people off. Why is it that we're only seeing this now? Why is it that Yammer hasn't been more front page as this is what's going to drive changes at Microsoft?
Well, first let me say, Yammer is a horrible, horrible application. I've used it for a while. Its human-computer interface is cryptic. It's hard to use. I think maybe they just piss off the users so that people don't notice all those upgrades going on in the background. I'm glad Mary Jo, said that, about Yammer contributing more attitude and so forth, because, oh my God, these guys really need to learn about human-computer interfaces. I would hate to see the Yammer human-computer interface is going into SharePoint because, man, it's bad. But, but
so I hate it.
Their upgrade scheme isn't bad. You know, come on, that's a good technology. Their interface is not.
Okay, I don't know how we follow that up. Mary Jo, rebuttal.
How do I really feel, right?
I'm not going to rebut him on that at all. But you know, one thing I will say, because we haven't even brought this up in this whole segment yet. You know, we're talking about how people want to get more agile at Microsoft and come out with things more quickly, and Yammer's influencing this. But I should point out, so people who are watching the show here don't freak out completely. Microsoft knows there's a number of enterprise users who don't want this, right? They know not everybody is ready for stuff to rev quarterly. Forget about weekly, monthly, daily. Forget that. And they're being very careful around this if you watch their wording and their strategy. So their pitch, I believe, is going to be, if you're somebody who likes to live on the bleeding edge and you're not afraid of these kind of rapid iterations, then you should go cloud. If you are a business that doesn't want any part of this, and even once a year is almost too often for you to get a new release of something like Office or Exchange, then you're probably more of a candidate to use the on-premises version. And they haven't yet said how often they're going to update like Exchange on-premises or Lync or SharePoint. It may only be once a year. It may be even less. So I just wanted to make that really clear so people aren't completely flipping out like Exchange is going to rev every 2 days. It's not going to be that.
Okay. Yeah, Curtis, let me give you the penultimate saying here. Looking at the enterprise, listening to what we've been talking about all the new upgrade cycle, about the new look Microsoft, about the more responsive Microsoft, is this something that enterprise could actually get behind? I mean, do you see this making a dent when speaking to an executive and trying to explain to him why it's a good thing that Office is revving every year rather than every 3 years, or telling him why Microsoft Windows is now going to include more feedback and more customer desires in its overall release schedule? Do they get that, or do they not care?
I would say that to the extent the enterprise cares, it's to be very unexcited by a lot of this, because many of these things are driven by the consumer and driven by the consumer refresh cycle. Remember, enterprises are still largely on a refresh cycle that runs somewhere between 3 and 7 years. They are not excited by the idea of monthly, quarterly, even biannual updates. What they want are things that are steady and reliable so that they can build business processes around them and train their employees once and then get out of the way. What they don't want is something that is getting in the way of productivity. They see the rapid changes, the continual retraining, the frequent breakage of new products as things that get in the way of productivity. So to the extent that this matters to the enterprise at all, it shows how much the consumer world has started to intrude on the enterprise world. The real way that this is going to have an impact on the enterprise is in availability of hardware and software, and in executives who are hooked on a rapid consumer refresh cycle coming in to ask their IT managers why things aren't changing more rapidly. Left to their own devices, I think most enterprise IT folks would still be on something between Windows XP and Windows 7.
Thank you. Concise as always, Curtis. Now, Mary Jo, I'm afraid we do have to move on. I want to thank you for coming on and spreading the love about Microsoft. We wanted to have you on last week, but you were just blowing up and you just couldn't break free from your schedule. Can you let us know what you're working on, what you're doing, what the Quiet Riot should be paying attention to as you continue to blog?
Yeah, I'd say one thing that everybody should be watching in the next couple months is what happens with Windows Azure on the infrastructure as a service side. So even though the start button and all that just kind of ruled the news over the past couple weeks on Microsoft, they actually rolled out something that didn't get a lot of attention, but is huge. They rolled out general availability of Linux and Windows Server in virtual machines on Azure, which is really huge. Because now, if you want to host a Linux app, a Windows Server app, even things like SQL Server, BizTalk, Microsoft's own apps, you can now do that on Windows Azure. It's very much generally available. And this was a piece that a lot of people have been waiting for because Microsoft didn't really have the answer to AWS. They were just playing up Azure as a platform as a service and not infrastructure as a service. And so now I think you're going to see Microsoft get really aggressive about going after Amazon. And that should be something really, really interesting to watch as we go towards like TechEd and Build and the Worldwide Partner Conference this summer. I think you're going to hear a lot about that. So keep that in mind, I'd say.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary Jo. Thank you for joining us. You can catch Mary Jo each and every single week on the Twit Network, Thursdays at 11 o'clock Pacific on Windows Weekly. Now, we're going to be back to continue our series about protecting yourself from a distributed denial of service attack. But before that, I do want to talk about the good people over at Rackspace. Now, everyone is talking about cloud computing, but not all cloud computing providers are the same. Some use proprietary technology, which makes it expensive, if almost impossible, to move your data, your services, from one provider to another. What you want is an open cloud solution built on open standards. That's why I'm excited to welcome Rackspace to the Twiat Riot. Rackspace is the open cloud company that co-founded OpenStack and now runs the world's largest open cloud. Open cloud means that you're not locked into a single provider. You have the freedom to move your apps, code base, and websites between multiple OpenStack-based clouds, public or private, on-premise or hosted. Big business or small, public or private services or data, Rackspace is the perfect solution for the Twiat crowd because they get the enterprise. Now, here's what I want you to do. I want you to build what you want, where you want, and how you want it, all backed by Rackspace's world-renowned fanatical support. You can try today. Download the Open Cloud at rackspace.com/open. That's rackspace.com/open. And we thank Rackspace for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Let's get back to it. Last week, we showed you a Stuff My IT Guy Says segment talking about a DOS, a denial of service attack, or a DDoS, a distributed denial of service attack. We teased that there might be ways to protect yourself. So this week, we've got the data closet.
I'm Father Robert Balacer, the Digital Jesuit, host of Twiat, This Week in Enterprise Tech on the Twit Network. We're here at the Hot Stage warehouse, a super secret location in Brisbane, California, for a segment of the data closet. This time I gathered a bunch of engineers to assemble one of the most advanced temporary networks in the world, and sitting next to me is engineer extraordinaire from F5, Ken Bocchino. Ken, thank you very much for talking to us.
Pleasure.
Your colleague, Sam, came on last week and talked about a denial of service attack, a DOS and a DDoS, or a distributed denial of service attack. One of the key features of any denial of service attack is that it's difficult to tell legitimate traffic apart from, well, attack traffic. That's why it's such a devastating attack on so many networks. You're here today to give us some strategies for mitigating a denial of service attack. So tell me, where does that start?
So you really got to understand that there's different levels of attacks from any DDoS or just DOS attacks. One at the network level, to the DNS resolution process, to the application level. So we cover all three of those and all the other ones that exist as well. But if we wanted to focus on the application level attacks that you might see as legitimate traffic, let's say a user going to your shopping cart, kind of browsing around, figuring out what they want to buy, then trying to check out. The smart attackers can actually work to tear that down and simulate the actual user as if they were a real user. What we're able to do is actually start to look at and create a signature around the type of traffic coming in and basically identify a synthetic transaction from an actual application user. We do that by actually watching and understanding the movements of the synthetic flow. asking the synthetic device to actually answer a few questions for us. Mouse movements, doing some simple math, whether or not they can actually load and deal with JavaScript. And we actually then also watch and look for the flow of the user. So if the user hasn't been to the main website or to a typical entry point for your shopping cart, more likely they're not ready to check out.
If I hear you right, what you're telling me is if you have a sophisticated enough system, you can actually look for what the client is doing. Are they moving from page to page to page to say checkout, as you would expect a regular user to do, or are they hitting the same 10 pages over and over again with no rhyme or reason? And then what's this other part? You actually query the client, so you ask the client to do a little mouse movement or a little math, because obviously an attack computer won't do that, right?
That's correct. So we're actually giving instructions to the user only if they start to look like they're suspicious. So wait a second, you've been to this page a couple thousand times. Let's go ahead and ask you a few questions.
Did you really need to refresh this page so many times?
Yeah, so we can query the user to actually provide some additional information that a lot of the bot networks out there can't do right now.
So whereas with a DOS attack, we could block out an IP and be done with it, if it's a DDoS, what we're really looking for are behaviors.
Yes, we're looking for behaviors, and we're looking to classify them at the application level, at the network level as well. So we can look at the traffic coming in, if it's malformed, if they're doing something at the layer 3, layer 4 packet level, we can actually start blocking and rate limiting that traffic as well.
I want to talk about a different type of denial of service attack that has become popular as of late, and that is a distributed denial of service attack on my DNS servers.
Yes.
That's one of these things that's kind of in vogue. We've known for a long time that DNS servers are kind of the weakest link in the internet, but there's been a general hands-off approach. Don't attack my DNS servers, I won't attack yours. But now it seems like people are using that same DDoS attack against the DNS servers, which can be devastating.
Yes.
And you can't really do the same sort of behavior approach for the application layer, right? I mean, you have to reply to every single DNS query.
Yes, you'll have to answer. If someone's asking for your website, you got to give them your answer. And you can't always rely that source address for that DNS lookup is valid. So it's very easy to spoof a DNS request, and you can't just simply block traffic.
Right.
So there's a couple different ways we can actually deal with that. Obviously, we want to respond. So if you have a name server that's not necessarily up to snuff with millions and millions of connections per second coming into the infrastructure, we have the ability to actually sit in front of that and protect the zones that you're hosting authoritative for. So we can actually drop traffic out for anything you're not authoritative for. We can filter, so we only allow real requests coming through. And then for the answers you have to give, we can give them extremely, extremely fast, millions and millions of connections per second back to the user. But another technology or architecture technique to work with this, and it's being used and deployed and has been deployed in the DNS infrastructure of the web for the last several years, ever since it was built, is the Anycast technology. So the ability to actually have multiple name servers that you're authoritative for live on the exact same IP address across all your data centers, and potentially into some bursting space as you need it, will allow you to actually take on a full-on DDoS attack. People don't think about it, but DNS is the first piece to fail in most enterprises getting DDoS, because you can't answer your name, no one's getting to it.
If I hear you right, it sounds as if you're saying that the way that you mitigate these attacks is, first of all, you have to have a fast box. So you have to have an advanced box that can respond to millions of requests per second, but then also you have to put it at the edge. You have to put it away from your core network so it can respond to those requests without eating up your core bandwidth.
Yeah, so the goal of really our equipment being able to deal with these millions of connections per second is you really don't want those connections to come further into your network, as you said. So putting us at the edge, right at the perimeter, or even up into the cloud, or right at the edge before you get down into your data hosting space, allows you to not have to worry about firewalls infrastructure sitting in front of you and having connection time issues or connection issues. It's really important to put your DNS infrastructure and the DOS protection at the edge as much as possible, so you can deal with the onslaught of open connections per second and block it before it goes into your more session-based network infrastructure or even your application level servers.
Ken, we're going to have you on again to go a bit more in depth, but until then, where should they go on the web to find out more about what, say, F5 can do to protect against DDoS?
We have plenty of solution articles as well as white papers up on f5.com. And as always, devcentral.com is a great resource to ask questions, to find out what other people are doing against attacks. If you already have the F5 gear, it's a great place to see what rules have been written to deal with things that are happening on the internet and can protect your enterprise against attacks that you guys are currently seeing.
I'm Father Robert, and this has been The Data Closet.
Cheebert, you and I just spent a week in the warehouse for Interop Hot Stage playing with the F5 gear that allows us to survive a DDoS attack. One of the really cool things that we're going to be doing at Interop this year is we're actually going to DDoS the network as we're broadcasting. I'm very nervous about that. I hope it doesn't crash, but it just might. Were you able to play with the F5 control panel at all?
Oh, no, unfortunately, I did not. There was all kinds of other things I needed to do. As far as DDoSing ourselves during the broadcast, all I can say is dum, 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 da-dum, dum, da-dum.
Yeah, it could be a disaster, but if the network survives and if the F5 boxes actually do what they're supposed to, and we are able to maintain a live video stream, that will be kind of epic. Curtis, back over to you. Let's get the enterprise side on this. We spoke briefly about the enterprise's understanding of what a DOS attack is and what a DDoS attack is. Do you think enterprise understands how important it is for them to protect themselves using the methods and services that we talked about in the data closet?
Well, I think the average enterprise has a team that understands how important it is to protect these things, and that's all that really matters. For the enterprise itself, the vast majority of people are really like the vast majority of consumers out there. They neither want nor really need to know about the inner workings of the internet. All they really want to know is that they are reasonably secure in going about their daily business. The enterprise, and this is one of those things that I use as a way to differentiate between a small business and an enterprise. An enterprise is a company with a network staff big enough to support one or more dedicated security professionals. And so, by definition, the enterprise has someone who cares deeply about this and who is working often against some pretty significant budget restraints to make sure that all of the people around him don't have to think about this much at all.
Right. Cheebert, I want to give you the last word here. What do you say? What would be the #1 piece of advice that people should have if they're trying to design their networks to survive a DDoS attack?
Start plugging holes. I see way too many people with just willy-nilly popping holes in their firewall, and that just gives me the willies. And the reality is, the more holes you have in the firewall, the more places the bad guys can, hit. Because remember, the DDoS attacks aren't just blind. DDoS attacks by a lot of these modern hackers are targeted at specific services, at specific machines. So if you've got lots and lots of holes, that's lots and lots of holes that your firewall might not be able to keep up with. So simple is better.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Again, we will be doing more DDoS goodness at the show. Next week's live episode from the show floor at Interop, Las Vegas, at the Mandalay Bay Convention Center, where we will be DDoSing ourselves to prove concept. Yeah, it goes a long way, as Duper said, to eating your own dog food. But before we get into our next segment, which is going to be all about the smart grid, I would like to take just a moment to welcome a brand spanking new supporter, to the Twiet Riot. Now, Twiet is all about the enterprise. We try to keep a fair and balanced view of tech and the processes and methods to keep your IT shop running, but I'll admit that we don't cover a whole lot in the Apple space. That's why I am absolutely happy to welcome TechServe as the newest member of the Twiet Riot. Now, as New York's premier authorized Apple reseller and technology provider, TechServe creates professional service for professionals at all levels, from individual consumers to Fortune 100 companies. TechCert carries a full range of Apple products, from iPhones and iPads to iMacs, MacBooks, iPods, and accessory. TechServe also has a range of partnerships with top vendors to facilitate flexible, efficient, and creative solutions for all of your business needs. Now, TechServe assists businesses of all sizes to deploy Apple, Avid, and Adobe solutions throughout the U.S. Whether you're already committed to iPads or just getting started, from sales to support, process to practice, TechServe can help. Some amazing technology solutions are being deployed on iPads. If you've ever been to the Delta terminals at LaGuardia, Toronto, or Minneapolis, you may have noticed nearly every seat in the terminal is equipped with an iPad. Travelers can now sit anywhere in the terminal and receive real-time flight updates on their iPad or use the iPads to order food, play games, browse the internet, and check email while they're waiting. Over 1.5 million visitors use these iPads in Delta's terminals just this past year. The result has been a double-digit increase in food and beverage revenue and the highest customer satisfaction scores in all participating airports. OTG Management is the hospitality company behind Delta's terminals. They've turned to TechServe to provide, configure, and install the world's largest deployment of iPads, a number that just keeps growing as they add new terminals. And TechServe was the natural place to turn. They sell, support, personalize, configure, and manage massive iPad projects, from the Delta terminals to a school with 700 chef instructors to an operation that delivered personally configured iPads to 3,000 cable technicians. TechServe is able to do full lifecycle management for all of your technology needs by providing the devices that you need, getting them up and running, teaching you and your staff how to effectively use them, and maintaining them so that they're working efficiently. TechServe also provides ongoing support so that if your enterprise has a problem, help is just a phone call away. Now, if you're adding iPads to your business, why not ensure the project's success with the world's most experienced partner? So here's what I'd like you to do. If your business is considering integrating iOS technology at your workplace, then contact TechServe today and receive a complimentary iPad deployment assessment. Visit techserve.com/twyit, and TechServe will help you assess your current or future iPad needs and give you advice to make it a success. That's techserve.com/twyit. Once more, techserve.com/twyit. And we thank TechServe for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now let's get back to it. We've got a fantastic end to the show because we're talking all about the smart grid. And we brought a special guest. That is Terry McDonald, the author of The Smart Grid Imperative. It's a book all about the future of the smart grid. Terry, thank you very much for coming on. Can you introduce yourself and tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Yes, Padre, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for having me. I've been a consultant to the utility industry for the last 38 years. I started working for my first utility in 1975. I have most recently completed work as the program manager implementing the smart grid in Glendale, California. And after completing that project, I discovered from talking to people managing projects around the country and around the world that there was a need for some information. And so I sat down and wrote the book as a way of sharing this information. And the objective of my consulting company is to help utilities to get ready to implement successful smart grid projects, or if they have a project in flight, to give them some information about how well that project is doing and if some corrective action is needed to help them take that corrective action. And I'm finding that there are huge opportunities to save large amounts of money, reduce risk, and produce better outcomes by doing that.
Now, Terry, smart grid is a phrase that gets tossed around every once in a while. I mean, I remember first hearing it maybe 15, 20 years ago after a major blackout, and people were saying, well, we need to move to a smart grid. We need to move to a smarter grid. We need to move to an interactive grid. What exactly are we talking about with smart grid? What technologies, what standards, what does it comprise? What do you need to have a smart grid?
Most of us who work in the business hated the term when it came out and still do, because it doesn't mean, it doesn't have a crisp definition to most people. So let me take a shot at it. But let me first start by just talking about the fundamental problem that every utility has to solve every minute of every day. And this started with Thomas Edison, and not a day since the days of Thomas Edison has this changed. And that is that the nature of electricity is that when someone wants to consume an electron, somebody has to, at that moment in time, be making it. I mean, because of the speed with which electrons move through wires, we can pretty much ignore the difference in time between when the electron is fabricated and when it is consumed. That being the case, we're constantly trying to balance the load on the network with the amount of electricity being produced on it. And so every utility employee wakes up and they go to work every day trying to solve this fundamental problem of providing the electricity that customers want when they want it, doing that reliably, safely, and economically. And, you know, you can do one or two of those things pretty easily, but doing them all simultaneously is very, very tough. And this goes back to, as I said, Edison in his Pearl Street station in New York, when he had 85 customers and 400 light bulbs and 175 horsepower steam engine driving a dynamo. When the 400 light bulbs came online, somehow he had to push that steam engine to make enough electricity to satisfy the load being presented by all of those bulbs. So the first definition of the smart grid is it's a new set of tools to help us to solve that same problem in different ways, and in so doing, creating even new opportunities. So there really are three ways we can define the smart grid. The first would be by taking a look at the characteristics of the elements of the smart grid. And let me just take a quick shot at that. The system that is being built in the United States, and I'm going to concentrate on the United States because the fundamental problem is the same everywhere, but the solutions are a little different. In the United States, most of the equipment in the field today is averaging over 45 years in age. We have an old infrastructure. Much of that infrastructure, to the extent that there's information available, it's analog information, and we're moving from, in the old world, analog information to the smart grid, digital information. So the smart grid is fundamentally based on digital information. In the old system, we had very limited connectivity, very limited access to equipment out on the grid, and very little feedback from it, very little telemetry. The smart grid is characterized by a very high level of connectivity, high bandwidth, low latency, lots of data flowing. And that's really the third element, is in the past, we had very little data. So, for example, in Glendale, California, the meters were read once every 2 months. Once we implemented the smart grid, the data coming in was based on 15-minute intervals. So roughly a 6,000 times increase in the amount of data about consumption. So abundant data is replacing very limited data. Actually, a data tsunami, that term is being used in the utilities, and a lot of work is being done on how do you deal with big data. Now, the good news is that utilities are going after banking has gone down the same road. They're going after telecommunications has gone down the same road. So many of the solutions that have been implemented in these other areas can be implemented in utilities as well. So that's the first way to define the smart grid, is those three characteristics. The second
Terry,
way...
let me interrupt you for a second here. I get it. I get that the old grid, the 45-year-old grid, it's aging, that it's falling apart, that a new grid would give us a lot more data points. And, you know, I'm in enterprise. I'm all about data. I'm all about big data sets. But the question still remains, which is, what's wrong with the current grid? I mean, it's delivering power, right? Why do we need a smart grid?
There are 5 factors that are driving all utilities to ultimately implement the smart grid. The first of them is a series of government mandates and incentives. There is a tremendous push on the federal, state, and local level to get utilities to adopt the smart grid. In some instances, laws have been passed that would make it impossible to operate a utility today without the smart grid. For example, in Texas, The law is that I have the right to choose anyone I want to supply my electricity. The utility is strictly in the business of delivering the electrons to me. They no longer are in I'm not even their customer any longer. They're simply servicing the network that delivers the electricity. What this means is I can do the same thing that I can do on a limited basis with my cell phone carrier today. I can, call up Verizon and say, I want to terminate my service. I'm switching my service over to AT&T. The difference is that the delivery mechanism will be the same set of wires with both companies. What that means is then the utility has to do an outread. They have to read the meter at the moment that I terminate service with provider A, and they have to provide an in-read into provider B. Now, this would mean, tens of thousands of truck rolls a day just to handle these exchanges, far more than they had the capacity to do. So with an automated system, they can do a demand read, take a look at what's on the meter, transfer that data over, and then supply the data to the vendor that I choose. So government mandates and incentives are number one. The second reason is purely economic. Replacing all of that old equipment is a horrendously expensive proposition today. It was one thing to build a transmission line when no one was living in a part of the country. But if you're trying to build a new transmission line today and you're going to try to condemn property and deal with all of the environmental issues necessary to run a new transmission line, you've got one heck of a long and tedious and expensive proposition in front of you. So if there's a way to extend the life of the existing infrastructure, and if there's a way to eliminate the need for new infrastructure, both of which the smart grid is capable of doing, and I'll explain how in just a moment, that's incredibly important.
Terry, let me break in for a second here. Chibert, I want to throw over to you because you've actually built data centers. You've actually put together colos. And one of the things that you absolutely need for any location that's been considered for a data center or a colo is consistent, stable power. How much of a contingency plan needs to be made to, say, assuage any fears from an unstable power grid?
Well, I've in some cases I've actually had as many as 3 different power sources for some of my data centers, but I can't talk about them. But I can talk about my friends over at Penn State. Penn State actually has their own power generation plant on campus, and all their data centers, they actually have 2 power feeds coming from utilities, coming from different directions on different sides of the campus, and in all their data centers they have 2 power buses going over every line of racks. One power bus is from one of the 2 utilities. The other one is from the power generation plant on campus. I have done similar things in the past when I designed data centers, and a lot of this is because we just don't trust the utilities. We've had too many brownouts, too many blackouts, too many momentary glitches that can do a hell of a job to mess up a supercomputer run. So, yeah, I'm sorry. We do need something smarter. We do need something so we can predict what's happening to the systems. And so I've done something about it.
Janiscu 7 in the chat room wants to know, Chiba, are those solar panels above your head?
Not only are they solar panels, here's the output from my my solar plant. So we've had some sunny days and some not so sunny days, and I'm going to use this as a nice segue because Terry and I have had a conversation a little before we started. One of the things about electricity is that it doesn't store real well. Water, you can put tanks up on hills, but storage of energy is really tough. There's lots and lots and lots of research projects going from batteries to water wheels to, I saw this one girl designing a compressed air system, giant compressed air systems to store electricity. I've even seen proposals for flywheels. The problem is they don't always work. They're expensive. They're hard to maintain. They're mechanical parts that can fail. So that makes electricity really hard. And actually adding photovoltaics, adding wind power actually destabilizes the grid, because now the utilities can't predict where that power is coming from. So a smart grid, in my mind, is the only true answer. And I'm doing my part. My system actually talks back, and I'm due for a smart meter any day now.
Terry, let me throw that back over to you, because that's actually one of the things that a lot of people don't understand about a smart grid. When they think smart grid, they just think, oh, okay, they use technology so they can find out where power is going. But it actually can help with a continental increase of efficiency of where power is generated and used. How does that work?
Yeah, integrating renewables is a major challenge, and Brian just talked about one of them, and that is that if you look at that graph, it's a roller coaster. If you had an instantaneous read on the output of those panels, as a cloud goes over the panels, the voltage changes very substantially. So what Brian is actually doing is introducing into his local feeder from his utility, he's introducing a fluctuation. So he's actually degrading power quality. The other oddity with utilities is they provided, I'm sure they provided him incentives to install that array. So it's one of the few businesses where you go around paying customers to stop buying your product. And in addition to that, they're probably buying the output. I think there is an in-feed tariff in Hawaii, and you have one of the highest utility rates in Hawaii anywhere. So generating that electricity and selling it back to the utility is a really nice deal. But for every megawatt of solar on the grid, they also have to have a megawatt of some other form of generation, because first of all, solar obviously doesn't generate at night, but if there was a very dense cloud cover, that electricity has to come from somewhere else. So the utility has to pay twice. They have to pay for the solar, and they have to pay for an alternative generating source. And they need the situational awareness on the entire grid to know what the heck is going on, because now we have two-way flow of energy instead of one-way flow of energy. So the original grid was all designed for one-way flow. But on a national level, if we're back here in the continental United States, we have three major grids. We have the West, the East, and Texas. And those grids have large pockets of renewables. For example, vast quantities of wind in the Pacific Northwest, big wind in Texas as well. Well, if the wind stops blowing in Texas, it's unlikely it's going to simultaneously stop blowing in the Pacific Northwest. So if we can move that power around, we can start to manage these fluctuations much more successfully.
Yeah. Curtis, let me throw this over to you for a second here. When we talk about solar, when we talk about renewals, when we talk about smart grid, is that something that you think most enterprise execs need to know, or do they just need to know we can make your power usage better, we can make it less expensive, we can make it more efficient?
I think that for a certain level of enterprise executives, it's the latter. They want to know that this a relatively fixed cost portion of their infrastructure, the utilities cost, is going to be manageable and is going to be as small as possible. Now, there are those within the data center building and management teams who are very interested in where that power is coming from. One of the things that we've also seen is that a growing number of companies are interested in where the power comes from for public relations values. We've seen companies like Apple, like Google, talking about how green their power consumption is, because let's face it, big data centers suck down monstrous amounts of power. If you can say that those are coming from green sources, it adds a lot to the warm and fuzzies your customers get. But the bottom line for most enterprises is, in fact, the bottom line. They want to know that they're not paying any more for this basic commodity of business than they absolutely have to.
Right. I want to break it down to a more fundamental level. We've got a couple of stories here. The first one from Forbes talking about Nest. Remember that thermostat company created by one of the team leads from iPod development? How Nest was teaming up with utilities to provide an entry to the smart grid for consumers. Now, we've got Nest partnering with various utilities for the smart grid, including Austin Energy, Reliant Energy, the National Grid, Green Mountain Energy, and Southern California Energy. Two of the programs that Nest is offering are called Rush Hour Rewards and Season Savings. And the gist of it is that they allow for dynamic adjustment of usage of power in a house for heating and cooling based on the data collected from all those big data points. So where's the energy coming from? How expensive is it? What are people doing? What does this user normally like as far as temperature points during different times of the day at different temperatures? It's a smart way of consuming power, but the big point is that the Nest adjusts automatically after learning a user's personal preference and taking into account rush hour costs for power. Now, I think that's one of the easiest ways to understand the smart grid, that you've got a node that can intelligently draw power when necessary and not use it when it's required at other parts of the smart grid. Terry, let me throw that back to you. Bringing that into the enterprise, what kind of ROI can executives expect out of adopting a smart grid approach? For example, allowing their office to use, I've seen a few products that will automatically shut off lights or turn off computers or shut down servers that are not necessary. What do we need to make that big push of the smart grid into the enterprise?
So the energy management systems that you're talking about, whether it's a home energy management system or it's an enterprise energy management system, what makes those interesting is if a utility is able to offer a rate that incentivizes that use. And with the introduction of smart meters and frankly, the meter is just one piece of a system that includes a number of other pieces. But with the entire advanced metering infrastructure system in place, a utility is able to offer creative rates that are essentially gain sharing rates. What happens is the utility, by sending price signals to the consumer, whether it's residential or commercial, can incentivize a change in behavior that either shaves the peak or shifts the peak in a way that saves the utility vast quantities of money. And the reason why this is so is that utilities without this technology have to charge you a blended rate. So they're charging you the same rate for every kilowatt hour, regardless of the time of day that you consume it, when in truth, the cost of that kilowatt hour is vastly different depending upon the time of day. So for example, in California, all investor-owned utilities were mandated to introduce advanced metering infrastructure. And again, the piece of that you see is the smart meter. And then as a consequence of that, they are now enabling processes and systems that can offer time of use rates to customers. Now, commercial customers, big data centers, for example, I would be stunned if most big data centers haven't been contacted by the utility to discuss some sort of special rate associated with time of use or peak demand. They've got to be on a demand rate to begin with. So the rapid payback occurs when the data center then takes a look at creative ways of keeping the data center running, but being able to shape their load accordingly. And one of the most interesting ways of doing that I've seen is by using thermal storage. So Brian was talking about how difficult storage is, and storage really is the holy grail. If we get a good, cheap, effective battery technology or ultra cap or something of that sort working, it will be a massive game changer. But in the short run, one technology that absolutely does work is the storage of either ice or chilled water. So one of the examples that I think is a real standout is the University of California in San Diego, where they have massive data centers, they have hospitals, they have research. You talk about needing to have dependable electricity, the Scripps Institute stores all of the ice cores that they've been collecting for decades in freezers. And the person in charge of energy at UCSD was told by the dean, for God's sakes, keep the popsicles frozen. You know, you can imagine if they lost all of these ice cores, how devastating that would be. So what they put in was, I think it's a 3.5 million gallon tank, insulated tank, that they can fill with chilled water when it's cheap and easy to make chilled water. So if you've got, for example, a windmill running, or if you've got a photovoltaic array and you have surplus energy from it, you can run chillers and chill that water and then store the water for when you need it. And by so doing, you can then employ that water for cooling instead of using compressors for cooling during the peak of the day. And the payback on that is very rapid, and it's green, it's efficient, it's effective. It's something that really does work.
Well, we're going to be back to exposing the secrets of the smart grid in just a second. But first, I wanted to talk about our last sponsor of the show, and that's RingCentral. You know, when we built the brick house, we decided that we wanted to eat our own dog food. We had been telling people how great the cloud is, so we wanted to put everything in the cloud. That included our documents, our show prep, our email. Everything ran from the cloud. And so when Leo was told by Russell, our IT guy, that we could get a cloud-based phone system through RingCentral, well, it was a no-brainer. We love RingCentral. There are zero startup costs. There's no PBX hardware to install or maintain. RingCentral allows us to easily customize all of our call handling. Our producers can get their voicemail and their emails, and we can even get all of our fax messages on our smartphones. And now they have a new feature. It's called the RingCentral app for Salesforce.com. You can integrate all of your phone calls with your CRM system seamlessly. You can create new records for contacts and leads and create real-time call notes while you're on the call. It makes your CRM more productive, and it's easy to use. So that's your very last excuse for not going with RingCentral. So here's the offer. We want you to try RingCentral. RingCentral offers all-inclusive pricing as low as $20 per month per user. You can start right now with a 30-day risk-free trial, and they have a special offer for my listeners. When you buy one desk phone, you get a second phone free, up to 20 phones. So call this number, designated for my listeners, 800-543-9980. That's 800-543-9980. Hey, you put down the candy bar and write this number down, 800-543-9980. Or you can go to ringcentral.com and use the promo code TWIT. We thank RingCentral for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Getting back to the smart grid, Curtis, let me go over to you for a second here. We talk a lot about the technology that's enabling the smart grid, that's enabling devices to be intelligent about when they draw power, about saving up power in unique ways, like, for example, the 3 mega million gallon tank of chill water. But there is another part to the smart grid, and that's actual adoption. That's the mindset that needs to go behind making the investment for a long-term gain. What do you think needs to happen in the enterprise in order for managers, for execs, for IT directors to figure out that we need to invest a lot now to get a lot out of the future?
I think the biggest thing is for the companies developing the components of the smart grid to promote the fact that this can be done as a retrofit. Smart grid, smart devices of all sorts, and especially the communications infrastructure to handle them, is seen by most people as being something that is only an opportunity for a new build. If you are building a new data center, you make it intelligent. If you are building a new office, you give it intelligent capabilities. It has been far too expensive and far too difficult to retrofit existing buildings, existing facilities with the smart technology. And so I think that's really the key, because let's face it, if you go to an executive and say, we can save you so many hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on utilities, but by the way, you've got to tear down and rebuild every facility that you manage. the conversation's real short after that. If you can go to them and tell them, look, here are the retrofit costs. We know that doing this for new construction is a no-brainer. Here's the way to decide whether it can be done on your existing facilities. That's when things start to change.
Cheever, let me go over to you. Again, having built data centers yourself, you understand that one of the biggest problems is simultaneous heating and cooling of a space. We've got these servers that are punching out a lot of heat, and they have to be cooled. So we've got this weird, well, dichotomy. We want to heat we want to cool the room down so the servers stay okay, but at the same time we need a way to remove the heat past the cooling. Tell me a little bit about that hot aisle concept that you had been working on a while back.
Well, hot aisle and cold aisle is a very old concept. It's been around for decades. And simply put, it's just put your cooling right at the demand. So you put what are called in-row cracks or in-row computer room air conditioners, and then you put plastic over your racks and surrounding your rack so that the hot stays only in the hot side, the cold stays only on the cold side. And what you're doing is you're preventing the two air masses from mixing. Makes it a lot more efficient. And by putting the cooling, the chillers, actually at the heat load, you don't have all that loss that you have under a traditional data center floor. You know, that floor, the raised floor, everybody thinks, oh, it's for cables. No, it's not. Traditional computer room air conditioners pump cold air into the floor, and you put perforated panels where you want the cold air to come out. There's a lot of heat loss, a lot of cooling capacity loss. By putting the chillers, putting the heat exchange units right next to the load, you get considerably more efficiency.
Terry, I want to give you the last word here. Again, talking about that whole dichotomy of power usage, power consumption, smart grid. At the intersection of these technologies, where do you expect us to be in the next 5 years? What do you think needs to change? What has to happen in order for the smart grid to become a reality?
I think it's going to become a reality regardless with all of the forces in play right now. What will accelerate that a bit is improved standards. The more standards we get out there, the easier it is for adoption, the easier it is to mix and match components in a system. After the initial wave of major projects that were inspired by the incentives being provided by the government, more and more the projects are going to have to pencil out on their own merits. But I think that they will. I think the adoption may be slowed a little bit by less support from the government. But I think that all utilities are going there. And as they replace aging infrastructure, which they have to do, as they replace aging infrastructure, when you order the new component, it almost always comes in digitally ready for communication and control. Just the systematic replacement of components, which is happening at a brisk pace now because of the age, will drive a lot of this. As far as the consumer adoption, I think it starts to get interesting when the new rates are in place that provide the incentives that allow you to take advantage of these incentives to fund the deployment of a home energy management system in the home or a energy management system, a building energy management system in the enterprise. But the thing that consumers have to understand is that, or the public in general has to understand, it takes a while to build out the infrastructure within the utility that would enable those sorts of rates to be deployed and supported in a way that didn't drive customers nuts. So a lot has to be done under the hood to get the enterprise ready, to get the utility ready to be able to support those rates. By the way, one thing that all of our listeners ought to be thinking about is these projects are like 90% IT projects. I mean, you see the meter installation. That is the tip of the iceberg. A lot of the rest of this is all about telecommunications and IT. So we're seeing, a big storage area networks being put in. We're implementing enterprise service buses. The new software, the new hardware is all IT stuff. And so IT professionals who are looking at a career could make the transition to working with utilities on the smart grid and have a very nice run for the next 30, 40 years doing really cool stuff. This is cutting edge technology, and a lot of it, a new IT professional would be able to get in on the ground floor, build a reputation, and be able to service this part of the business for a very long time.
Terry, thank you very much. And you've used up another hour and then some listening to This Week in Enterprise Tech. I want to thank you, but first I want to thank our panelists, starting with Terry McDonald. Terry, thank you very much for coming on the program to talk about the smart grid. Where should people go to find out more about the smart grid or to find your work on the smart grid imperative?
They can go to tsmcdonald.com. Or they can go to Amazon. The book is available both as a print version and as an ebook version on Amazon. And if they go to tsmcdonald.com, just drop me a note in the comments section. I'll get back to them, and we can chat or whatever. But I very much appreciate the time. I'm a Twyat fan. I'm a twit.tv longtime listener. I've been with the network for the whole 8 years, and I just love the work you guys do. You've provided lots and lots of people with both entertainment and education.
And it's always great to have longtime listeners as part of the Twyat Riot. Let's go over to Brian. Brian, you're out on your patio, so obviously you're feeling good. What's happening in your life in the next week that people should know about?
Well, in the next week, I'm heading to Interop. Though on the subject of smart grids and so forth, right above my head, there's eventually going to be thermal sensors, temperature sensors on each and every one of these panels, because as solar panels get hotter, they get less efficient. So I'm actually taking a lot of the data that my PV system is generating, and I'm actually feeding that into a big database at the University of Hawaii as part of the Sun Power for Schools project. We're trying to track on what makes the PV systems less reliable or more reliable. We're actually tracking where the clouds are so we can actually predict when cloud coverage is going to degrade the PV production. Ought to be really interesting.
Now, can you pack that in your bag and bring some of it to Interop?
Maybe.
Okay.
I'm going to bring Kona coffee, Hawaiian sunshine in a bag.
That's Brian Chi, the evangelist for ThinLinks. Over to you, Curtis Franklin of Enterprise Efficiency. You'll be joining us as well in Interop, yes?
Oh, absolutely. I'm going to be there all week talking to a lot of people, already setting up a bunch of interviews. I'll have those as pieces on enterprise efficiency, as well as some great videos I'm planning to shoot. In addition, before I head out to Las Vegas, I've got an E2 radio show tomorrow. We've got an executive interview that should be very interesting, looking at the Chief Technology Officer of K2, the software as a service provider, and looking forward to that. All kinds of exciting stuff happening, and I'm always thrilled to have members of the Twyat family drop by, tell me where I'm wrong, and offer suggestions for making things right. If they want to drop me a message to my Twitter handle at KG4GWA or to Franklin at enterpriseefficiency.com, love to read the suggestions.
And, of course, we thank everyone who's actually watching us right now. Without you, we wouldn't have a show, and we love to keep Twyat. But did you know, let me throw some knowledge at you. Did you know that you could get every single episode of Twyat downloaded into your device automatically? That's right. If you jumped into our show page at twit.tv/Twyat, you could find all the options for getting each and every single week of Uber Geek Enterprise goodness delivered into your iPad, your iPod, your Android device, tablet, or phone, even your Zune. That's right. We give you all the different ways to have this goodness delivered to the hotness that is your mobile device. Also, I didn't know if you knew this, but we actually do this show live. We're one of the last tech networks to actually do this. We show you how the sausage is made. Every Monday at noon, you can go to live.twit.tv and see us put together Twiet for your enjoyment pleasure. Also, as long as you're watching us live, why not jump into the chat room? You may have heard me a few times during the show refer to people asking questions in the chat room. Well, that's part of the experiment that is Twit. It's not just a chat room, it's temporary community. Also, why not jump onto my YouTube page at youtube.com/Twiet, where you'll be able to subscribe and get all of the Twiety goodness in YouTube format. Not only that, but as soon as I put the finishing touches on some of the older Stuff My IT Guy Says and data center segments, we're going to be loading all those segments into our YouTube channel, which means you'll be able to watch just those segments. It's a nice way to continue your education if you're an enterprise IT geek. Also, follow me on Twitter. Please follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/PadreSJ. There you'll be able to find out what we're going to be doing each week on the show. You'll be able to comment on what we've done, what you want to see, and you'll be able to follow the life of the digital Jesuit. Also, please give love to Cyberdog in the chat room. He's the guy who throws together our show notes, which is difficult sometimes because it's pretty chaotic. Finally, thanks to everyone back at the Brick House who makes this show possible, to Karsten, my super producer, to Jason, my normal TD, who is being very aptly replaced by Yammer B, and to you, the Twiet listener who comes back each and every single week. To you, I say, if you want to know what's going on in the enterprise, just keep Twiet.